2 empty chairs in Harvard Yard taught me one thing. Some people only love the spotlight, not the person. I didn't cry. I made a decision. From that exact moment, they thought they were winning. In reality, they had just walked straight into my gentle trap. In the next 10 minutes, I will tell you why the applause at my graduation turned into my family's silent judgment day. My name is Nina Moreno. I grew up in Cedar Ridge, Oklahoma. Cedar Ridge is a town built on 2 things: high school football and knowing your neighbor's business before they do. It is a place of wide, sun-baked streets where the silence of a Tuesday afternoon is broken only by the hum of lawnmowers and the slam of a screen door. Here, curtains twitch. Conversations at the Rise and Shine diner are a quiet murmur of exchanged information, and judgment is passed with a sweet tea smile. If your family steps out of line, you will know it by the sudden quiet at the church potluck, the way folks' eyes slide past you at the grocery store. In Cedar Ridge, everyone has a part to play, and the script is written in stone. Our family, the Morenos, were the town's dysfunctional royalty. My mother is Lydia Moreno. If you ask her, she is still, and will forever be. Miss Plains states, 1993. The 90s may have ended, but for my mother, they are preserved in acrylic. She lives inside the memory of a single spotlight, a beaded gown, and a crown that, in her mind, she never took off. She walks through the aisles of the Price Mart with her chin tilted at an angle that defies gravity, as if balancing that invisible weight. Her voice is a performance, a smooth, practiced alto that she uses to charm, to command, and to correct. Posture, Talia, she will murmur, not even looking at my sister, her eyes fixed on the cantaloupes. A queen never slumps. It suggests weakness. She ran our home not as a mother, but as a pageant director. Perpetually 5 minutes from showtime, her approval was a trophy, and it was only ever offered for one thing: visible perfection. My father is Graham Moreno. He owns Moreno's HVAC and Repair, the name emblazoned on the side of a white van that always smells faintly of coolant and dust. My father is a man made of quiet angles and the grease under his fingernails. He is the physical embodiment of acquiescence. He believes that peace is not the presence of joy, but the absence of conflict. He has mistaken silence for stability his entire adult life. While my mother's voice filled every corner of our house, my father's presence was a vacuum. He would sit at the head of the dinner table, chewing his food methodically, his eyes on the small, grainy television he kept on the kitchen counter. When my mother's critiques would sharpen, when the tension coiled in the room, he would just clear his throat, fold his napkin, and say, "Well, looks like rain." He was the audience, the silent majority, the man who paid the bills and kept his head down. His silence was his endorsement. Then there is my sister, Talia. Talia is the muse of the spotlight, the project, the vessel. She was not raised, she was curated. Her childhood was a blur of sequin stretch fabric, the acrid sting of aerosol hairspray, and a calendar governed by catwalk practice, interview coaching, and talent rehearsals. Her room was not a teenager's sanctuary. It was a backstage dressing room. One wall was floor-to-ceiling mirror, where she practiced her surprised winning face. The other was a corkboard of schedules and diet plans. Pageant weight was a familiar phrase in our house by the time she was 10. Talia is beautiful, with the bright, manufactured gleam of something designed to be seen from a distance. She is not unkind, but she is hollowed out. She is a collection of my mother's ambitions, a doll animated by the promise of applause. And there was me, Nina. I was the stagehand, the fixer, the one who disappeared into the background. My role was functional. I was the one who knew how to thread a needle in the dark. My fingers quick and sure as I sewed Talia back into a costume 5 minutes before her cue. I was the one holding the plastic bin for her to be sickened from nerves. I was the one who packed the protein bars, who double-checked the registration forms, who sat on a folding chair in the drafty auditorium wings, my textbook balanced on my knees, reading about constitutional law while Talia practiced her walk. My hands were for hemming, for stitching, for fixing, and then for turning the pages of my books. I was the infrastructure that made the show possible. And like all good infrastructure, I was designed to be invisible. In the Moreno house, there was an unspoken dictionary. The definitions were set by my mother, and the primary entry was this: beautiful equals worthy. Success was not measured in grades, in kindness, or in effort. It was measured in polish. It was the shine of your hair, the flatness of your stomach, the flawlessness of your smile. Our dinner table was the primary courtroom for this judgment. It was never a place of rest. It was a place of assessment. "Talia, you're holding your fork like a farmer," Lydia would say, her own knife and fork moving with delicate precision. "Elbows in, you are not eating, you are dining. Graham, did you see the girl who won Miss Teen Arkansas? Her mother got her a top-tier coach from Dallas. We are falling behind." Any news I offered was met with a brief, distracted nod. "Mom, I made the state debate finals." "That's nice, Nina," she would reply, not looking up from inspecting Talia's cuticles. "Just make sure you don't scuff the floor with those sensible shoes. Talia, we need to schedule another tanning session. Your legs are looking pale." My achievements were processed as noise. Talia's potential was the signal. The walls of our house confirmed this. The living room was a shrine. It was not a family room. It was a gallery. Every frame held a moment of triumph. And all the triumphs belonged to Talia. Talia at age 5, a tiny, terrified little Miss Sparkler. Talia at 8, clutching a bouquet of plastic roses as junior Miss Cedar Ridge. Talia at 12, her first regional title, the sash draped over her shoulder, her smile frozen in a rictus of practiced joy. I was in some of them, if you looked closely, a blurry shape in the background, a shadow at the edge of the frame, half cut off, my glasses reflecting the flash. I was the before picture, the plain background that made the subject pop. Cedar Ridge accepted these roles without question. It made sense to them. Lydia was the town legend, the one who made it out, even if she came right back. Talia was the second act, the town's next great hope, and I was the safe one, the smart girl. When people in town saw me, they smiled that polite, dismissive smile. "And Nina, still got your nose in a book, huh? Good for you, sweetie." It was a consolation prize, a pat on the head for the child who had failed at the only thing that mattered. So I leaned into it. I made the library my home. I made books my armor. I built a fortress out of academics, a place where the rules were clear and effort was rewarded, not just judged on its aesthetic. I collected A+ like my sister collected tiaras. They were quieter, but they were mine. The seed of my rebellion did not start with a scream. I never slammed a door. I never had a teenage shouting match in the living room. My rebellion was silent. It was meticulous. It began the way a lawyer builds a case, with evidence. It started with a shoebox, a simple, brown cardboard shoebox that once held a pair of those sensible loafers. I kept it under my bed, pushed far into the back corner. Inside, I kept a notebook, a simple, spiral-bound, college-ruled notebook. At first, I just wrote down the things that were said, the dinner table verdicts, the casual dismissals. March 10th, Mom told Talia, "A C+ in a beautiful girl is better than an A+ in a plain one." Dad said nothing. April 2nd, asked for money for the SAT prep course. Mom said, "We have to tighten our belts. Pageant season is expensive." Then, I started collecting more. I was 16 when I found the first receipt. My mother had told me the Family Education Fund, a small trust my grandmother had set up, was a little tight. I needed a new laptop for my AP classes. That same week, I was gathering trash and saw a receipt from a boutique in Tulsa pushed into the bottom of the kitchen bin. A competition gown, custom beaded, $2,400, charged to the account I was told was tight. My hand didn't even shake. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me. I smoothed the receipt, folded it, and took it to my room. It went into the shoebox. From then on, I became an archivist of my own erasure. I found the bank statements my father left on his desk. I cross-referenced the dates. Tuition. My mother would call a $400 charge. I would find the matching entry in Talia's pageant planner. Interview coaching. Dr. Allister. I would find withdrawals for school supplies that matched the invoices for pageant headshots and rhinestone applications. It wasn't anger I felt. Not really. It was focus. It was the slow, steady click of puzzle pieces falling into place. I wasn't a daughter. I was an unlisted creditor. And this family was my first, most complex case. The day I was accepted to Harvard Law, I was sitting at the kitchen table. The house was empty. Talia was at a fitting. My mother was with her. My father was at the shop. The email arrived with a simple, quiet ping. I read the word congratulations and felt not a burst of joy, but the solid, heavy satisfaction of a lock turning. I waited until dinner. The three of them were there, my father smelling of oil, my mother smelling of perfume, Talia picking at a salad. I got into Harvard Law today, I said, placing my napkin in my lap. My father grunted, then smiled. Huh, Harvard, good school, good school. He gave me a quick, firm pat on the shoulder before turning back to the local news. My mother paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. Harvard? Goodness, Nina, that's a very long way away. Her eyes scanned my face, not with pride, but with a strange, analytical distance. They have pageants in Boston. I'm sure you could be a useful contact for Talia when she goes national. It is all about who you know. She had managed to make my acceptance a networking opportunity for my sister. Even in my greatest victory, I was still the stagehand. The final piece slotted into place because of Mrs. Hanson, my AP government teacher. She was a sharp, tired woman who saw everything. After a class discussion on how history is written, she asked me to stay behind. She leaned against her desk, folding her arms. Nina, she said, her voice low. You are the quietest person in this room, but your essays are furious. You build an argument like you are taking something apart, piece by piece. She looked at me, really looked at me, in a way my own family never had. I want you to remember something, she said. History is not written by the victors. It is written by the person who picks up the pen. The person who tells the story is the one who decides who the hero is. I went home that night. I took out a small sticky note and wrote her words down. I opened the shoebox, now nearly full of receipts, notebooks, and bank statements. I stuck the note to the inside of the lid, right where I would see it every time. The person who tells the story decides who the hero is. I closed the lid. I had my evidence. I had my precedent. And I knew, one day, I would be the one to tell the story. I would be the one to decide. 3 years of my life were compressed into a single, sterile email confirming my graduation status. The requirements were met. The work was done. The next step was the ceremony, the public acknowledgement, the symbolic end. I did everything by the book. I went online and reserved the official Harvard Law invitations, the ones embossed with the Veritas shield, thick as cardstock, expensive as a textbook. I mailed one to the house in Cedar Ridge. I did not just send an invitation, I was setting a table. I went onto the airline's website and booked 2 round-trip, first-class tickets from Tulsa to Boston Logan. I used my own savings, the money from the summer internship I had fought to get. I did not want cost to be the excuse. I made them non-refundable, a small, private test of my own resolve. I then booked a suite at the Charles Hotel for 3 nights, the one overlooking the river. I put the confirmation, a printout with a total cost that ran over $4,000, into the envelope with the tickets. I sent it via certified mail, requiring a signature. I left no room for error, no plausible deniability. I wanted them to know this was not a casual request. It was the culmination of everything. I was presenting my case, and their attendance was the only acceptable verdict. I tracked the package. I saw the looping signature of L. Moreno, confirming receipt. Then I waited. A week passed. The spring chill left the Cambridge air, replaced by the thick, humid promise of June. My exams finished. I sat in my small apartment, the windows open, the sounds of the city muted, staring at my final blue book. The phone buzzed on the table, a text from my mother. It was not a phone call. A call would have required a performance of emotion. A text was administrative, efficient. It was a dismissal. Nina, I have just realized your Harvard day is the same weekend as the Tri-State Finals. Talia is the frontrunner. This is the biggest night of her life. You know that? The National Scouts will be there. We cannot possibly be in two places at once. You understand? Don't you? There it was. Not a question. It was a statement of fact, disguised as a plea for empathy. You understand, don't you? It was the phrase she had used my entire life to assign my role. I was the one who understands. I was the one who makes sacrifices for the spotlight. Talia performs. I understand. Lydia directs. I understand. I was the reliable, sensible supporting beam. The one who does not complain when the weight of the entire structure is placed on her. I stared at the glowing green bubble. We cannot possibly be in two places at once, but they could. They simply chose the other place. They chose the Klieg lights over the halls of justice. They chose the glitter-covered runway in a high school auditorium in Muskogee over the historical weight of Harvard Yard. I thought of the $4,000 for the tickets and the hotel, an amount that would have funded an entire pageant season for Talia when she was 12. To me, it was an investment in a final, fragile hope. To them, it was an inconvenience. I did not reply. The message was not seeking a discussion. It was delivering an order. 2 days later, my father's text came. It was short, pitifully short. Proud of you, kiddo. My fingers tightened on the phone. Proud. It was a word that cost him nothing. It was a text sent from the sidelines, likely from the driver's seat of his HVAC van, safely out of earshot of my mother. Proud was his absolution. It was the 45-cent contribution he made to my entire 3-year legal education. He was proud, but not proud enough to show up, not proud enough to argue with his wife, not proud enough to sit on a plane for 3 hours to see his oldest daughter receive one of the highest academic honors in the world. His pride was as silent and useless as he was at the dinner table. His text was not support. It was a white flag. He was surrendering me to my mother's ambition, as he always had. The silence that followed was absolute. No one called to apologize. No one asked about my graduation plans. The electronic void confirmed what the shoebox full of receipts had always told me. I was not a daughter. I was a line item they had decided to cut from the budget. The day of the commencement rehearsal. The air was thick and hot. We were herded into the yard, a sea of black robes, nervous energy, and parental cameras. I walked with my classmates, listening to the drone of the marshals calling out instructions. We practiced our walk, our turn, our handshake. And then I saw the chairs. In the front section, reserved for the families of the graduates, were rows upon rows of white folding chairs. Each one had a name. The university was meticulous. I walked the aisles, my sensible shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass, and I found them. 2 white chairs, side by side. Taped to the back of each was a crisp, white card, printed in elegant script. Mr. Moreno. Mrs. Moreno. They were waiting. They were reserved. They were empty. I stood there for a long time, just looking at them. The other students flowed around me, a river of black robes and chatter. But I was an island. I felt a cold, sharp clarity settle into my bones. The same clarity I felt when I found the first falsified receipt. This was not a moment of sadness. It was a moment of confirmation. The hypothesis was proven. The evidence was tangible. I pulled out my phone. I stepped back, framing the shot. The 2 empty chairs, the official name cards, the blurred green of the yard behind them. The click of the shutter was quiet, Almost delicate. It felt final. It was the closing of a case file. As I stood there, a hot June wind, the same that had been blowing all week, gusted through the yard. It lifted the corner of the card on my father's chair. The paper flapped. Mr. Moreno, flap, flap. It was a weak, dismissive wave. The wind was the only thing acknowledging the name. It was just a piece of paper, stuck to a chair, representing a ghost. I watched it for a moment. This was the end of my performance. My role as the understanding daughter was over. The curtain had fallen. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed. The room was quiet. I picked up my phone. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to M. Mom. I tapped the name. The entry opened. I looked at the picture I had assigned to it years ago. A photo from a family trip to Lake Tenkiller, one of the rare days we were all smiling. I pressed edit. My thumb hovered over the name. I felt nothing, not rage, not sorrow, just order. I systematically backspaced, MOM, and I typed LYDIA. Then I scrolled down and typed in her last name, MORENO. I hit save. I scrolled to D, Dad. I tapped edit. I deleted the name, GRAHAM, MORENO. Save. It was not dramatic. It was not emotional. It was a correction of the record. It was tidy. They were no longer my parents in any functional sense. They were just people I knew. People with names. People who were, from this moment forward, opposing counsel. I walked over to my desk. The shoebox was long gone, replaced years ago by a locked metal file box. I opened it. Inside, the bank statements, the faked receipts, the lists I had kept. On top of it all was my legal journal, the one where I practiced case arguments. I took the official, embossed commencement program from my bag. I did not rip it. I did not crumple it. I folded it, precisely, in half. I placed it inside the file box, on top of all the other evidence. I picked up my pen. I opened the journal to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote the date. Underneath it, I wrote the words that Mrs. Hanson had given me, the words I had saved. From now on, I am the narrator. The graduation itself was a performance. I put on the heavy black robe. I adjusted the purple-trimmed hood. I walked with my classmates. I sat in the heat. A famous senator spoke about truth and integrity. I listened to the words and filtered them through my new reality. Truth was what you could prove. Integrity was what you did when the spotlight was off. My name was called Nina Moreno. I walked. I felt the eyes of thousands on me. I knew none of them. The applause was a dull roar, the sound of strangers being polite. I shook the dean's hand. I took the rolled-up diploma, and as I walked back, I looked at the spot. The 2 chairs were still there, bright, white, and violently empty. The sun glinted off the metal legs, in a sea of weeping mothers and cheering fathers. My section was a black hole. It was a perfect physical manifestation of their choice. I did not cry. Crying was a biological response to pain or loss. This was not a loss. It was a confirmation, a data point. After the ceremony, the yard exploded into a chaos of joy. Families converged, hugging, laughing, sobbing. I stood alone, an island in my black robe, holding my diploma. A classmate, a guy from my study group named Alex, pushed through the crowd. "Nina, we did it!" He hugged me, and then pulled back, looking around. "Where are your folks? My family's over by the statue. We're taking 1,000,000 pictures." "They couldn't make it," I said. My voice was light, airy. I had practiced it. My sister had a big final for her pageant. It was a whole thing. "A pageant?" Alex looked confused. "They skipped this for a pageant?" "It's a big deal in my hometown," I said with a small, tight smile. "Man, that is brutal," he said, shaking his head. "Well, listen, you need a picture. You can't not have a picture." He pulled out his phone. "Here, hold up the diploma. Smile." I smiled. It was a smile I had perfected. The "I am fine" smile, the "this does not affect me" smile. It was a mask of pleasant, professional competence. The camera clicked. "I'll email it to you," he shouted, as his own family pulled him away. "Congrats, Nina." I watched him go. I stood there for another minute, the diploma heavy in my hand. The applause of strangers had faded. The celebration was not for me. It was for them, the people with families, the people whose presence was valued. I turned and walked away. I did not go to any of the parties. I went back to my empty apartment. I took off the robe and let it fall to the floor. The email from Alex arrived. "Here you go. Congrats again." I opened the attachment. The picture was perfectly clear. There I was, Nina Moreno, Juris Doctor. The smile was bright. The robe was immaculate. The diploma was held front and center, and next to me, in the space where a family should have been, was a wide, green, empty expanse of grass. The photo was the perfect piece of evidence. It was me, and the void. It was the summary of my entire case. I did not cry. The time for that was over. The grief had been processed, filed, and stored. Now, it was time for the work. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. The diploma lay next to it, a weapon I had just earned. I opened a new blank document. A cursor blinked, waiting. I typed a title, Project Chair. I hit Enter. My fingers moved quickly across the keys. Phase 1. Full financial and forensic audit of the Joel Blake Education Trust. Phase 2. Identify conflicts of interest within the tri-state pageant circuit. The planning had begun. I moved to Boston on the 1st of July, 3 weeks after graduation. My apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up in Somerville, a tiny studio that cost more than my parents' mortgage. It smelled of old wood and the curry shop downstairs. I started my summer internship at Northwall and Pierce 2 days later. Northwall and Pierce was the opposite of my apartment. It was a cathedral of glass and steel in the financial district, a place that smelled of quiet money, leather polish, and the faint, papery scent of 100-year-old trusts. I was assigned to the Trusts and Estates Division, buried deep in what they called document review. It was not glamorous. It was me, a secure laptop, and a digitized mountain of other people's family histories. My job was to sit in a beige cubicle for 10 hours a day, scrolling through 30-year-old memos and wire transfer records, looking for a single misplaced decimal point, a single signatory error. The firm was training me to be a forensic hunter. They were teaching me, hour by billable hour, how to find the single thread that could unravel an entire tapestry, and every night I would go home, sit at my small IKEA desk, and apply that methodology to my own life. The file box, the physical archive of my childhood, had come with me to Boston. The first thing I did was buy a high-speed document scanner. I spent an entire weekend digitizing every receipt, every bank statement, every annotated program, every photograph. The shoebox became a password-protected, triple encrypted container on a solid-state drive. I started with the account my mother always called the Blake Education Fund. This was the money my great-grandmother, Joel Blake, had set aside. It was supposed to be for academic enrichment. In my childhood, it paid for debate camp and SAT prep courses. In Talia's, it was a bottomless well. I opened a new spreadsheet. The discipline of the law firm had calmed me. I was no longer an angry child. I was an auditor. Column A, date. Column B, withdrawal amount. Column C, payee, as listed. Column D, Lydia's internal code. Column E, actual purpose. I had years of data. I started with the paper statements I had saved, cross-referencing them with the partial online access I still had. The patterns emerged, stark and undeniable. A charge from 3 years ago. Column D, University Prep Seminar. The amount, $2,500. Column C, Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild. A charge from 2 years ago. Column D, Scholastic Materials. Amount, $800. Column C, Symphony Silks, Inc. Another. Column D, AP course fees. Amount, $300. Column C, Tri-State Pageant Federation. The Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild was my mother's local project. She was the director. She had turned a small-town nonprofit into her personal slush fund. She was submitting invoices from the guild to the trust administrator, using vague, academic-sounding categories. Physical training for Talia became Advanced Kinesiology Seminar. Wardrobe became Applied Textile Arts. The federation fees were just labeled extracurricular dues. Lydia was coding the expenses. She was using the guild to launder the money, issuing clean, sanitized invoices that obscured the fact that she was draining an academic trust to pay for spray tans and beaded gowns. She was funneling the money, my inheritance, into Talia's runway walk. I worked backward, inputting every line item. My spreadsheet grew. It was a meticulous record of fraud, but fraud required proving intent and violation of the governing rules. I needed the source document. I needed the will. I had it. When I was 17, during one of my archival phases, I had gone through my father's filing cabinet. He kept all the important family documents in a metal box in his closet. I found the original, stapled copy of my great-grandmother Joelle Blake's last will and testament. I had photographed every single page with my phone, just in case. The photos were blurry, taken in the low light of the closet, but they were legible. I pulled the image files onto my new, large monitor at my apartment. I read the text, no longer as a teenager, but as a student of Harvard Law, an intern at Northwall and Pierce. The language was suddenly, luminously clear. Joelle Blake had been a schoolteacher. Her entire life was dedicated to education. Her will reflected that. She established the Blake Academic Fund, and the text was specific. The funds were to be dispersed for the pursuit of verified academic excellence by her descendants. And then I found the clause, Section 4, Subsection C. It was a provision defining what verified meant. My mother, as the primary executor of the fund along with my father, had to attend and formally certify the completion of the funded academic milestones. I froze. Attend and formally certify. My mother had always loved performative requirements. She loved rules that demanded an audience. She must have insisted on this language, thinking it would force her children to value her presence, thinking it would guarantee her a front-row seat. I kept reading. The language was dry, standard trust speak, until I reached the appendix. Appendix B, Reallocation Provisions. In the event that a primary beneficiary willfully fails to attend or refuses to certify a culminating milestone event, e.g., graduation ceremony, doctoral defense, of a secondary beneficiary, Nina Moreno, all discretionary and decision-making powers vested in that primary beneficiary regarding the fund shall be immediately and irrevocably forfeit. The text blurred. I read it again. Willfully fails to attend. The 2 empty chairs. The text message. You understand, don't you? They had not just skipped my graduation. They had signed a default judgment. Lydia had walked, eyes wide open, into the very trap she had set for others. The clause continued. Said discretionary powers shall be transferred in their entirety to the secondary beneficiary whose milestone event was unattended. The room was silent. The hum of my laptop was the only sound. I closed my eyes. The power to control the fund, the power to approve or deny expenses, the power to define academic excellence. It was mine, the moment they chose the pageant. The keys to the kingdom were passed to me. They just did not know it yet. My breath came back, steady and cold. This was no longer just about reimbursement. This was about control. My investigation pivoted. The fund was the leverage, but the pageant itself was the disease. I followed the money trail from the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild. Where did the federation fees go? The checks were written to a parent company, a limited liability corporation, Tri-State Pageants, LLC. I used the professional databases at Northwall and Pierce. It was a simple corporate lookup. Tri-State Pageants, LLC, a for-profit entity registered in Delaware, with its principal place of business in Tulsa. I looked at the listed corporate officers. And there, listed as Honorary Co-Director, Regional Outreach, was Lydia Moreno. The conflict of interest was so blatant, it took my breath away. It was a perfect, closed loop. Lydia, as a trustee of the Blake Fund, was approving payments to the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild, which she controlled. The guild was then paying federation fees to Tri-State Pageants, LLC, where she sat on the board. She was paying herself, using my academic inheritance to fund her own hobby, her own status. She was draining a non-profit trust to prop up a for-profit corporation she was a director of, all under the guise of education and opportunity for young women. The final piece was the contract. What was Talia, and all those other girls, signing up for? Again, the archive. I had photographed Talia's contract 2 years ago. She had left it on the kitchen counter, and my mother had demanded she sign it immediately. "Do not read the fine print, darling," Lydia had cooed. "That's what lawyers are for. Mommy will protect you." I pulled up the image of the 20-page document. I read the fine print. My mother was not a protector. She was a predator. The contract was pure exploitation. Section 7B, Image Rights. Tri-State. LLC claimed exclusive, royalty-free, in perpetuity rights to any and all images of the contestants, not just from the pageant, any images, for any purpose, forever. They owned their faces. Section 9. Conduct. Contestants could be disqualified for behavior unbecoming of a title holder, a term left purposefully undefined. And then, the weapon. Section 12D. The silence penalty. In the event a contestant engages in any public disparagement, criticism, or negative commentary regarding the Tri-State organization, the contestant shall be liable for liquidated damages in the amount of $10,000. A $10,000 gag order, a fee fat im lang. It was designed to terrorize 18-year-old girls into silence. It was a protection racket disguised as a scholarship program. I leaned back in my chair. The spreadsheet was complete. The folder of JPEGs containing the will was open. The highlighted PDF of the contract was saved. I looked at my desktop background. The 2 empty chairs, gleaming white against the green grass. My mother had built her entire world on a foundation of miscoded checks, exploitative contracts, and emotional blackmail. She thought the spotlight kept her safe. She never imagined someone was watching, taking notes, from the shadows. I closed the file. I did not feel anger. I did not feel rage. I felt what I felt in the Northwall and Pierce document review room when I found the critical, case-winning memo. I felt the cold, clean satisfaction of a job well done. I smiled. No anger, just the files. The goal was never to ruin Talia. To destroy her would be like smashing the prize doll. It would satisfy an immediate, primitive rage, but it would leave the entire rigged carnival game intact. My mother would simply find another doll. My target was the game itself, the corrupt ecosystem that ran on bad lighting and broken dreams. The architecture of my plan was not about demolition. It was about a hostile takeover. I was going to leverage a breach of contract to force a moral renovation. My strategy, which I had named Project Chair, was built on 3 load-bearing walls. Prong A, the Blake Family Fund. Prong B, the Tri-State contracts. Prong C, the public narrative. Each had to be constructed with precision, filed in the correct order, and deployed without emotion. Prong A was the lever. It was the cleanest piece of law I had. It was a simple, profound breach of contract. My mother and father, as trustees, had violated a key provision of the will. To activate the reallocation clause, I needed more than just my memory and the photo of the empty chairs. I needed irrefutable, third-party proof. My work at Northwall and Pierce had taught me that assumptions were the enemy. I filed a formal records request with the Harvard Commencement Office. For a fee of $25, I requested a certified letter verifying the attendance status of my 2 registered guests, Mr. Graham Moreno and Mrs. Lydia Moreno. 3 days later, a crisp envelope arrived. I opened it. The letterhead was heavy. embossed with the university shield. The text was dry, administrative, and perfect. It stated that the tickets registered to those names were issued, but the associated barcodes were never scanned at any entry point. They were, in the official record of Harvard University, a certified no-show. This letter, combined with the saved text messages from Lydia, "You understand, don't you?" and my father's weak, "Proud of you, kiddo," formed a complete picture. It was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a willful, documented failure to attend. This evidence was the key. I would file a petition with the trust administrator, citing Section 4, Subsection C, and Appendix B. I was not asking for the money back. I was asking for the keys. I was asking for the total transfer of discretionary power, exactly as my great-grandmother Joelle Blake's will demanded. Prong B was the battering ram. It was designed to break the system of exploitation that protected my mother. That $10,000 silence penalty in the tri-state contract was the lock on the cage. If I could prove it was legally unconscionable, a penalty designed to terrorize, not to recover a legitimate loss, the whole wall of silence would crumble. But I could not be the face of this. I was Lydia's daughter. Any court would, at first glance, dismiss my claims as a family squabble, a bitter child lashing out. I needed other voices. I needed a chorus of the exploited. I became a digital ghost. I used my intern access to legal and public databases, spending my nights building a file. I compiled a list of every contestant in the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild and Tri-State Circuit for the past 6 years. I was not interested in the winners. I was interested in the ones who competed once or twice and then vanished from the scene completely, the ones who dropped out mid-season, the ones whose mothers suddenly stopped posting about pageants. I created a secure, anonymous email address. Routing it through encrypted servers, I drafted a message, careful and professional. I am a legal researcher based in Boston, conducting a study on contract fairness in regional scholarship pageants. I am interested in hearing off the record about your experiences with organizations like Tri-State, LLC. All communications are strictly confidential and protected. I sent it to 15 names, for 48 hours. There was nothing but the hum of my laptop. I expected this. They were scared of the $10,000 fine. Then, the first reply came. It was 2 words. "Are you real?" I responded, identifying myself not by name, but by my credentials. A Harvard Law graduate interning at a Tier 1 Boston firm. I attached a redacted copy of the contract, highlighting Section 12D. I wrote, "This clause is likely unenforceable. I am gathering data." The dam broke. My inbox, which had been silent, flooded. One email, then another, then 5. The stories were all the same. Variations on a theme of exploitation. One girl was billed $2,000 for breach of contract when she quit to take a college internship. Another was threatened with the penalty for a private Facebook post where she complained that a judge, who was also a pageant sponsor, had asked for her hotel room number. A third had her image used to sell a local car dealership's Summer Sparkle event, for which she was paid nothing. They were a small, terrified army. I offered them simple, free legal counsel. This is my opinion, not as your lawyer, but as a researcher. That contract is a weapon of fear, not of law, and I am building a case to disarm it. I began taking their anonymous, sworn affidavits. Prong C was the spotlight. My mother lived for the spotlight, but she had only ever used it as a tool of presentation. I was going to use it as a tool of investigation. The public narrative had to be controlled. I was not interested in a messy, viral explosion of gossip. That was Lydia's style. I was interested in a single, surgical strike, a story that was quiet, devastating, and fact-checked. This required allies. I could not, and should not, do this alone. My first call was to my former faculty advisor, Dean Lara Quinn. She was a woman who specialized in legal ethics, and her moral compass was a finely calibrated instrument. We met for coffee under the guise of a mentorship check-in. I laid out the case, not as a daughter, but as a lawyer analyzing a problem. "Dean," I said, sliding a folder across the table, "I have a hypothetical, a nonprofit education trust. The primary trustee, A, is diverting funds to a local guild, which A also controls. That guild then pays fees to a for-profit corporation. B, where A sits as an honorary director. Is that a breach of fiduciary duty?" She did not even open the folder. She looked at me over her glasses. "That is not a breach, Nina. That is a textbook definition of self-dealing. It is profoundly corrupt." "And what if," I continued, "the trust charter has a penalty clause? That if trustee A willfully fails to attend an academic milestone of beneficiary C, A forfeits all control to C?" Her eyebrows shot up. "That is a very specific, and very foolish, clause for A to violate." "She violated it," I said, and slid the Harvard certification letter across the table. Dean Quinn read it. A slow, rare smile spread across her face. "Well, then it seems C has a very clear path. Do not let emotion cloud your judgment. Stick to the breach. Stick to the fraud. The case is clean. Do not make it dirty." She became my unspoken advisor, the ethical guardrail on my entire project. My second ally was for prong C. I needed a journalist, someone who understood the mechanics of the systems I was trying to dismantle. I found him in an investigative podcaster named Diego Rios. His show, Backstage, Backfire, was required listening for anyone who followed the dark side of hobby industries. He had exposed the doping scandals in competitive cheerleading and the financial ruin of amateur bodybuilding. He knew this world. I sent him my anonymous email. "I have a story about contract exploitation and nonprofit fund misuse in the Oklahoma pageant circuit. I have copies of the contracts, access to anonymized victim testimony, and documented proof of financial self-dealing from a director." He replied in under 1 hour, "Call me, now." We spoke for 2 hours. His voice was gravelly, skeptical. I laid out the prongs. I explained the gag clause. I described the flow of money from the Blake Fund to Tri-State. He listened. "Okay," he said. "This is a good story, but what's the hook? What makes it personal? I get stories about bad contracts every day." "The hook," I said, "is that the director who is doing this, the one enforcing these contracts, just skipped her own daughter's Harvard Law graduation to be at one of these pageants. The daughter is me." There was a long silence on the phone. "Oh," Diego said. "Oh, this is the one. This is it. Send me the picture." "What picture?" "The picture, the one you must have. The graduation picture." I looked at my desktop background. Me, my robe, my diploma, and the void. "I have it," I said, "but it is not to be used yet. This has to be precise." The timeline was everything. I set a date. 4 weeks from now, the night of the next Tri-State Regional Final, the very pageant my parents had chosen. It was the night Lydia would be at her most visible, her most arrogant. I established the order of operations. This was a legal chess game, and every night I ran simulations in my apartment. If Diego's podcast drops first, prong C, my mother plays the victim. She claims a bitter, jealous daughter is spreading lies. She rallies Cedar Ridge around her. The narrative gets messy. I lose control. If I file the petition for the trust first, prong A, she panics. She sees the attack coming. She tries to move the money, hide the records, and shred the guild's invoices. No, the sequence had to be surgical. Week 1. Consolidate the affidavits from the anonymous contestants. Week 2. Dean Quinn would, as a favor, review my petition for the trust administrator and my draft for a temporary restraining order on the Tri-State contract penalties. Week 3. I would file both, under seal where possible. The legal machinery would be in motion, quietly. Week 4. 2 days before the pageant, Diego Rios would drop his episode of Backstage Backfire, complete with the audio of the anonymous contestants, the analysis of the contract, and the story of the Blake Fund. The public narrative would not be the attack. It would be the explanation for the legal filings that were about to become public. And through all of it, I protected Talia. In every document, every affidavit, every conversation with Diego. She was not an accomplice. She was the current title holder, a minor, a party bound by the same unconscionable contract as the others. I was legally and morally separating her from the blast radius. This was not about her. This was about my mother, my father, and the system that allowed them to flourish. My silence was my greatest weapon, from Oklahoma. They heard nothing. They assumed I was in Boston, nursing my wounds, being the sensible daughter who always, eventually, understands. They had no idea I was coming. They were not prepared for a lawsuit. They were prepared for tears. I was not going to give them tears. I was going to give them discovery, injunctions, and a perfectly executed plan. The firm of Northwall and Pierce was a machine that ran on billable hours. But my real work began at 10 o'clock at night, back in my Somerville apartment, with a cup of black coffee and a secure internet connection. Project Chair was moving from theory to execution. Each step was a quiet click, another pin falling into place in a very complex lock. I started with the widest net. My mother's power in Cedar Ridge came from her perceived civic importance. The Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild was a nonprofit, and nonprofits often seek public grants. I filed a state-level Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA, with the Oklahoma Secretary of State and the Oklahoma Arts Council. The request was broad, asking for all financial disclosures, grant applications, and funding records for both the Guild and its parent company, Tri-State Pageants, LLC. I wanted to know if my mother was using taxpayer money, not just my inheritance, to fund her spotlight. It was a procedural formality, a small door to peek through. Sometimes, a small door opens into a very large, dark room. While the state bureaucracy churned, I focused on the civil suit. The anonymous contestants were my leverage, but they needed a shield. I could not represent them. I was too close. A walking conflict of interest. Instead, I used my legal research databases to find the perfect proxy. A young, ambitious attorney in Tulsa who specialized in contract litigation and had a reputation for fighting bullies. I contacted her from one of my anonymous email accounts, presenting her with the Jane Doe case. I fed her the sanitized affidavits, the contract analysis, and the seed money for the initial filing fee, which I routed through a third-party payment system. She would be the face. I would be the strategist. Our first, most critical motion was for a temporary restraining order, a TRO. This was the battering ram. The goal was to have a judge immediately declare the $10,000 silence penalty unenforceable. Our argument was simple, and in my opinion, beautiful. We argued the clause was legally unconscionable. It was not a reasonable measure of liquidated damages to protect the pageant's reputation. It was a penalty. It was an illegal tool of coercion, a disproportionate punishment designed not to recover a loss, but to ensure silence. It was, we argued, against public policy, as it enabled the corporation to operate without fear of exposure for other potential wrongs, including the very financial self-dealing we were investigating. We were asking the court to unlock the cage before we went after the owner. To protect the women who had come forward, I built a digital fortress. I established an encrypted group on Signal, a secure messaging app. No names were used. I was the administrator. They were Witness A, Witness B, Witness C. Here, they could share their stories, their receipts for absurd fees, their screenshots of threatening emails from pageant officials. I was the firewall, taking their raw, emotional testimony and stripping it of all identifying details, converting it into cold, clean facts for the Tulsa lawyer to use in her motions. Their fear was real, but their combined evidence was powerful. The moment the civil suit was filed, our Tulsa lawyer served the subpoenas. This was the legal maneuver that allowed us to demand access to the locked basement. We did not just ask for the contracts, we demanded the ledgers. We demanded all bookkeeping records, all internal emails, and all correspondence between Tri-State Pageants, LLC, and the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild dating back 5 years. We were demanding the receipts for Lydia's entire operation. This was the part I was waiting for. The forensic accounting. My nights became a blur of spreadsheets. My training at Northwall and Pierce was in finding the lie in the numbers. I was preparing to receive their data dump and cross-reference every entry. I would take Lydia's educational expense codes and match them, dollar for dollar, to invoices from Symphony Silks or Glamour Shot headshots. I was not just building a case, I was building an indictment, a color-coded, undeniable map of how my great-grandmother's legacy was systematically siphoned to pay for my sister's glitter. While the civil suit engine was warming up in Tulsa, I executed Prong A in Boston. This was the quiet, personal strike. I compiled my evidence. The certified letter from the Harvard commencement office, confirming the unscanned tickets, the high-resolution images of Joelle Blake's will, the text message from my mother. You understand, don't you? Proof that her failure to attend was willful, not accidental. I scheduled a video conference with Mr. Alistair Finch, the trustee of the Blake Fund. He was an older man, a partner at a sleepy Tulsa firm, who had managed the trust for 20 years, likely by just rubber-stamping my mother's requests. I appeared on his screen not as Nina Moreno, the granddaughter, but as Nina Moreno, Juris Doctor. I wore my best suit. My hair was pulled back. Mr. Finch? I started, my voice polite but firm. I am calling today regarding a mandatory compliance review of the Blake Academic Fund. He looked confused, shuffling papers. Compliance? Nina, your mother handles the day-to-day. That is the issue, I said. I shared my screen. I did not show him the picture of the chairs. I did not show him my emotion. I showed him the law. As you can see, Mr. Finch, Section 4, Subsection C of the Trust Charter, which I have highlighted, required the primary trustees, Lydia and Graham Moreno, to attend and formally certify my culminating academic milestone. I clicked to the next slide. This is a certification of non-attendance from Harvard University, dated last month. It confirms their willful absence. He leaned into his camera, his eyes scanning the document. I could see him realizing the gravity of the situation. And now, I said, clicking to the final document, if you will direct your attention to Appendix B, the reallocation provision. In the event of a willful failure to attend, all discretionary and decision-making powers vested in that primary beneficiary shall be immediately and irrevocably forfeit and transferred in their entirety to the secondary beneficiary. I stopped sharing my screen. I let him see my face, calm, professional, unblinking. My goodness, he whispered. This is not a request. Mr. Finch, I said softly, this is a notification of a contractual and fiduciary transfer. I have the legal paperwork drafted to petition the court to force compliance. However, I am hoping to avoid that. To protect the reputation of the fund, I trust you will begin the administrative process of transferring all discretionary control to me immediately. He stared at me, a man seeing a ghost. He saw his own liability, his own failure of oversight. Yes, Miss Moreno, he said, his voice suddenly formal. Yes, I will begin the process at once. Prong A was engaged. The power was shifting. The first thing I did after that call was draft a document on my laptop. It was not a legal filing. It was a mission statement. I typed the title, The Empty Chairs Scholarship. It was a proposal for a new charter for the Blake Fund. The scholarship would be available to students from Oklahoma, with a preference for Cedar Ridge, who demonstrated academic excellence but who lacked familial support, either financially or emotionally. It was designed specifically for students whose parents, for whatever reason, would not or could not show up. My parents' absence would not be an ending. It would be a beginning. It would be the seed money for someone else's future. Finally, I assembled the press kit for Diego Rios. This was Prong C, the public narrative. It was a masterpiece of neutrality, containing zero personal attacks, zero emotional language. It was just a folder of facts. Inside, 1. A simple timeline of the Blake Fund's expenditures, showing the miscoded educational items. 2. A copy of the tri-state contract with the $10,000 silence penalty highlighted. 3. A summary of the TRO motion filed in Tulsa, arguing the clause was unconscionable. 4. A list of anonymized, verified quotes from the former contestants in the Signal group. 5. The photo, the only one, the 2 empty chairs in Harvard Yard. The caption was simple: reserved seating for Mr. Guo and Mrs. Graham Moreno at the Harvard Law commencement. The seats remained empty as the Morenos, including Tri-State Pageant co-director Lydia Moreno, opted to attend a regional pageant preliminary instead. Everything was ready. The legal filings were queued. The trust administrator was in motion. The press kit was on a secure server, waiting for Diego to hit publish. In Oklahoma, my mother was blissfully ignorant. I saw her social media posts. She was counting down the days to the Tri-State Regional Final. It was Talia's biggest night, the one where the National Scouts from the Miss America organization would be in the audience. Lydia was preparing her masterpiece, a night to launch Talia into the stratosphere. She was checking the lighting, polishing the stage, and reminding everyone of her own past victories. She had no idea that I had already filed the paperwork, that the inspectors were on their way, and that the entire theater was about to be condemned. The first strike landed at 9:00 a.m. Eastern, 48 hours before the Tri-State Pageant was set to begin. I was at my desk at Northwall and Pierce, reviewing a file on 18th-century maritime easements. My personal laptop, sitting on the corner of the desk, was dark. I did not need to watch. I had already built the machine. Diego Rios released his podcast episode. He had chosen a title I had not suggested, but it was perfect. Empty chairs at a place that is never empty. His voice, a low, gravelly baritone that commanded attention, was the first thing the listeners heard. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He simply read. He read from the Blake Academic Fund Charter, his voice lingering on the words, academic excellence. He read from the Tri-State, LLC, corporate filings, his voice highlighting the name, Lydia Moreno, honorary co-director. He read the liquidated damages clause from the contestant contract, and then he paused. $10,000, he said, the silence after it stretching for 3 full seconds. That is the price of a young woman's free speech in Oklahoma. He played the audio, the anonymized, voice-modulated clips from the Signal group. He told me I was unbecoming for having dinner with a male friend, a synthesized voice said. The next day, my mother got a bill for $2,000. They used my photo for a tanning salon advertisement, said another. I asked for compensation. They sent me a copy of the contract with Section 7B highlighted and a letter from their lawyer. And then, he told my story. He did it simply. He spoke of a daughter at the top of her field. He spoke of Harvard Law. He spoke of the embossed invitations, the non-refundable plane tickets, the reserved hotel suite. He spoke of the choice. A mother, Diego's voice concluded, was faced with 2 stages. One, a historic stage in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to honor her daughter's lifetime of academic achievement. The other, a high school auditorium stage in Muskogee, to launch her other daughter's pageant career. She chose the glitter. She chose the crown. The podcast was the audio. The next strike was the visual. Simultaneously, Diego's social media team released the press kit. The key image, the one I had taken in the yard, began its journey. It was not posted on any of my accounts. I remained a ghost. It appeared on Twitter, on Instagram, on the podcast's associated Facebook page. It was just the picture. Me, in the black robe, the purple hood draped correctly, the diploma clutched in my hand, my smile, polite, professional, and thin. And beside me, the gaping void, the 2 empty white chairs, their name cards, Mr. Moreno, Mrs. Moreno. Just legible enough, the caption was not an accusation, it was a legal verification. Exactly as I had written it. Attendance verified. I kept a browser tab open on my laptop, logged into my dormant Neighborly account for Cedar Ridge. Neighborly was the town's digital backyard fence. It was usually a mundane stream of lost cats, complaints about teenagers parking near the fire hydrant, and recommendations for plumbers. At 9:15 a.m., the first post appeared. "A very strange podcast was released today," wrote a woman I recognized as a neighbor from 3 streets over. "It mentions Lydia Moreno and the Pageant Guild. Does anyone know what this is about?" The first reply was confusion. "Probably just jealousy. Lydia has done so much for our girls." The second reply was the link to the podcast. The third reply was the photo. And then, the dam broke. The cognitive dissonance of Cedar Ridge shattered in real time. Wait, that's Nina? At Harvard? I thought she just didn't want to come home. I just listened. He's saying she used the Blake Fund, the education fund, to pay for pageant dresses? Tell me that is not true. The picture, though, the chairs, she bought them tickets and they just didn't go. And then, the post that cut through the noise, the one that summed up the entire moral failure in a single, devastating question. It was from a mother I knew, a quiet woman who baked for the church. What kind of mother skips Harvard for a crown? The digital murmur became a roar. The Riverbend Church Women's Auxiliary Group on Facebook, usually a place for prayer requests and casserole recipes, went silent. The initial posts of, "We must pray for Lydia. She is under attack," were met with a new, cold query. Someone, likely one of Diego's team, posted a direct, non-sensationalized link to the scanned pages of Joelle Blake's will, highlighting the "attend and formally certify" clause. The "bless your hearts" stopped. The accusations of jealousy stopped. The conversation pivoted from "this is a family tragedy" to "this is a legal breach." They were a town of church-going, rule-respecting people. They did not like messy emotions, but they understood contracts. They understood wills. And this looked, to their suddenly clear eyes, like theft. The small, local businesses that propped up the guild were the first to run. They were not corporations with PR departments. They were men who ran hardware stores and car dealerships. Their loyalty was to the community, and the community was suddenly asking questions. I watched the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild website, clicking refresh every 10 minutes. The scrolling banner at the bottom of the homepage was my target. At 10:30 a.m., the logo for Cedar Ridge Auto Mall vanished. At 11 a.m., Jerry's Hardware and Feed was gone. By noon, the sponsors page was just a blank, white screen. My mother, predictably, responded not with facts, but with performance. Her Facebook status updated just after lunch. It was a professionally lit photograph of her and Talia from the previous year's pageant, both of them in tears of joy. Talia's crown glittering. "It is the deepest pain a mother can know," she wrote. "When a member of your own family, poisoned by jealousy and bitterness, turns on you, we are being smeared by vicious, unfounded lies. This is a targeted attack to derail Talia's future on the eve of her greatest triumph. Please pray for our family as we weather this storm." She had miscalculated. She was expecting a wave of sympathy, the usual fawning support from the town. She was prepared for an emotional fight. She was not prepared for a class of people who had just listened to a 1-hour podcast full of hard data. The comments under her post were not what she expected. "Lydia, we are all praying for you," one began. "But the podcast mentioned specific invoices from the Blake Fund. To clear your name, could you just post a summary of the fund's expenditures? That would silence the lies immediately." Another. "I'm confused about the contract. My daughter competed 3 years ago. Did I really sign something that said we would owe you $10,000 if she complained?" And another, from the same woman who had asked the question on Neighborly. "Lydia, I just want to know, did you go to Nina's graduation? Yes or no?" My mother, for the first time in her life, was facing an audience that was not applauding. They were asking for the receipts. Her post of victimhood was met with a chorus of calm, reasonable, devastating requests for transparency. My father, Graham Moreno, said nothing. He posted nothing. His Facebook page remained dormant, his profile picture a 5-year-old photo of him holding a fish, but his silence, the silence he had used his entire life as a shield to protect himself from my mother's drama, had changed its function. It was no longer a shield for him. It was an anchor for her. His silence on the non-profit fraud, his silence on the empty chair with his name on it, was not neutrality, it was an admission. By saying nothing, he confirmed everything. His silence no longer protected anyone. My phone, which had been silent for months, vibrated on my desk. A text message. Talia. Nina, what is this? What did you do? My phone is exploding. People are sending me that picture. Mom is locked in her room crying. You're ruining everything. This is my week. I looked at the message, the familiar sting of her casual self-absorption. My week. I thought of a dozen replies. I thought of the receipts, the lies, the years I had spent as her unpaid stagehand. I thought of the $10,000 contract that held her in the same cage as all the others. I typed one sentence, and one sentence only. You are not the target. I hit send. It was the truth. She was not the target. She was, like me, just another prop in our mother's show. And it was time to pull the curtain. My encrypted email inbox, the one I had used to contact the former contestants, began to chime. 1 email, then 5, then 20, the podcast, and the news of the TRO filing had broken the spell of the $10,000 fine. The messages were a flood of pent-up rage and validation. I just listened to the podcast. I cried. That was my voice. Thank you. I am ready to use my real name. That woman threatened to ruin my family's credit. The contract choked us. We were all so scared. She told us we would be blacklisted from every scholarship in the state. I did not reply with sympathy. I did not engage in celebration. I was not their friend. I was their processor. I read each email, tagged it, financial threat, image misuse, verbal abuse, stripped it of any remaining personal identifiers, and forwarded the raw data to the legal team in Tulsa. My personal commentary was non-existent. This was not a revolution. It was the orderly collection of evidence. Back in Cedar Ridge, the narrative had solidified. The community was not canceling Lydia Moreno. That was a sloppy, emotional term. This was something far more surgical. They were not demanding her exile. They were demanding the law. They were a community that believed in rules, and the evidence now suggested that the town's self-proclaimed queen, the icon of poise and success, had broken every rule she claimed to champion. They were demanding fairness, and fairness was the one thing my mother's performance could not withstand. T-10 days. The petition for the temporary restraining order was filed in Tulsa County Court. Our motion was quiet, attached to the larger civil suit, but its purpose was a tactical explosion, to immediately nullify Section 12D, the $10,000 silence penalty in the tri-state contract. It was a request to disarm our opponent before the main battle. The filing was routine, a stack of papers submitted by our local counsel. The response from the court clerk, however, was not, a hearing date was set. The court, seeing the urgency as the regional pageant loomed, scheduled the hearing for 2 days before the event. 48 hours. The clock was now officially, publicly, ticking. T-9 days. Tri-State's inevitable response landed. Their lawyer, a Tulsa heavy hitter who probably charged by the minute to intimidate teenagers, filed a motion to dismiss. His argument was a monument to arrogant laziness. He did not bother to argue the specifics, only the principle. It was a single, dismissive brief. Its core argument: the contestants were adults, they were volunteers, they read the contract, and they signed it. This is America. A contract is a contract. The plaintiffs are experiencing sour grapes and are attempting to use the court to renegotiate a binding agreement they now regret. The motion is frivolous. He was so confident. He thought he was swatting a fly. T-8 days. From my apartment in Somerville, I drafted the reply. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. My work at Northwall and Pierce had taught me that arrogance is a vulnerability. Our opponent was relying on a simple, broad concept of contract. I was going to hit him with a scalpel. I spent the night compiling a memo for the Tulsa team, a file that was part legal brief, part academic assault. I attached a comparative analysis, cross-referencing the tri-state contract with Federal Trade Commission standards on deceptive and unfair business practices. But the heart of the document was the case law. I cited 3 specific state-level precedents where penalty clauses, as opposed to legitimate liquidated damages, were struck down as unconscionable and void as a matter of public policy. I wrote a line for our lawyer to use. This is not a contract. It is a tool of coercion, designed not to protect a business, but to enable its misconduct by silencing its victims. T-7 days. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Boston. Dean Alara Quinn. Her voice was a necessary anchor. "Nina," she said, her tone crisp as ever, "I have read the coverage. I have reviewed the filings. You are walking a very sharp, very straight line. Keep walking it. Your case is in the law, not in your anger. The moment you let your personal history cloud the legal objective, you lose your footing. Remember what this is about. The unconscionable contract, the breach of fiduciary duty. Do not get pulled into a public mud fight about your family. Stick to the facts. The facts are your shield and your sword." I thanked her. She was right. The anger was the fuel, but the law was the engine. T-6 days. The forensic accountant I had retained on behalf of the Jane Doe plaintiffs emailed me her final report. It was a password-protected PDF. I opened it. It was 40 pages of spreadsheets, flowcharts, and bank statements. The summary page was a thing of brutal, beautiful clarity. The accountant had highlighted every suspect transaction in bright red. The money trail was no longer a theory. It was a map. I read the highlights aloud to my empty apartment. Red bullet, Cedar Ridge Guild invoice 042, University Prep Seminar, amount $4,000, match to Tri-State LLC. Invoice 088, National Director's Circle Fee, Pai L. Moreno. Red bullet, Blake Fund Disbursement, Scholastic Materials Grant, amount $2,200, match to Guild Check 1045. Memo, Pageant Gown Deposit, Symphony Silks. Red bullet, Blake Fund Disbursement, Educational Travel Stipend, amount $750, match to Guild Credit Card Charge. Merchant, Bronze Ambition Tanning Salon, full competition package. The lies were itemized. The fraud was no longer hidden in filing cabinets in Oklahoma. It was on my screen in Boston. T-5 days. My mother, cornered by the community and the podcast but still ignorant of the legal filings, did the only thing she knew how to do. She staged a performance. She called a press conference at the Cedar Ridge Marriott, the local news, smelling blood, attended. I watched the live stream. She was magnificent. She wore a pearl-white suit, her hair perfect, her makeup a mask of maternal grief. She stood at a podium, Talia beside her, looking pale and terrified. "I have dedicated my life," Lydia began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, "to honoring, to celebrating, to empowering the young women of this community." Right as she was building to her crescendo, Diego Rios dropped Backstage, Backfire, Episode 2. The title, The Price of Applause. I watched the news live stream as the reporters in the back of the room, one by one, looked down at their buzzing phones. Diego's podcast was not about feelings, it was about math. His voice read, calmly, every single red bullet point from the forensic accountant's report. He read the invoice numbers. He read the vendor names. Bronze Ambition Tanning Salon, he repeated, letting the words hang. A hand went up in the press conference. "Mrs. Moreno?" a local reporter asked, his phone in his hand. Can you explain why a scholastic materials grant from an academic fund was used to buy a pageant gown from Symphony Silks? My mother's face froze. The mask cracked. T-minus 4 days. The first official domino fell. Mr. Alistair Finch, the Blake Fund's trustee, was not a bad man. He was a lazy one, and now he was a terrified one. Faced with a public report from a forensic accountant and a looming legal threat from me, he acted to save himself. The Blake Academic Fund issued its first press release in its 50-year history. It was short, dry, and devastating. From the office of the Blake Academic Fund trustee, following a formal compliance review, and in accordance with the binding stipulations of the Joel Blake Trust Charter, it has been determined that a violation of Appendix B has occurred. Effective immediately, all discretionary and decision-making powers held by Mrs. Lydia Moreno and Mr. Graham Moreno are hereby forfeit and have been transferred in their entirety to the secondary beneficiary, Ms. Nina Moreno. The fund will have no further comment at this time. It was done. The money, the power, the fund, it was mine. T-3 days. My turn to speak. I did not grant an interview. I did not make a post. I acted in my new official capacity as the sole managing director of the Blake Academic Fund. I released a public memo. It was a draft proposal for a new initiative. Subject: the Empty Chairs Scholarship. This fund shall be established to provide funding for students demonstrating academic excellence who face significant personal and financial hurdles. Priority will be given to applicants from the state of Oklahoma whose immediate family members are, for any reason, unable or unwilling to be present to certify and support their academic milestones. The Blake Fund will be immediately repurposed to serve its original intent, rewarding true academic merit, not funding pageantry. I did not mention my mother's name. I did not have to. I had just turned her failure into a funding criterion. T-2 days, the Turo hearing in Tulsa. Our local lawyer stood before the judge. The tri-state lawyer, looking less confident, repeated his argument. A contract is a contract, Your Honor. Our lawyer was ready. Your Honor, a contract is not a suicide pact, and it is not a gag order that enables potential fraud. We have submitted 7 affidavits from young women who were financially terrorized by this clause. It is, by its very nature, unconscionable. The judge, a woman who had clearly read all the materials, did not hesitate. She looked at the tri-state lawyer. Sir, you are not running a scholarship. You are running a protection racket. I am granting the temporary restraining order. That $10,000 clause is hereby suspended, effective immediately. These young women are free to speak, and I suggest you advise your client that I will be watching their conduct very, very closely. The cage was open. T-1 day, the final dress rehearsal for the tri-state pageant. I had a source in the auditorium, a mother of a former contestant who was now part of our signal group. She described the scene to me. Lydia was on the stage, screaming into a headset about a lighting cue. She was brittle, her makeup thick, her voice a raw nerve. The auditorium was half empty. The tension was suffocating. In the middle of Talia's practice walk, a man in a cheap suit walked down the center aisle, his shoes squeaking on the floor. He walked up the steps, past the line of girls in matching t-shirts, and straight to my mother. Mrs. Lydia Moreno? He asked. I am busy, she snapped. You are served, he said, handing her the papers. My source watched as my mother read the document. It was not a request. It was a subpoena duces tecum, a legal order compelling the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild to produce every invoice, every check, every email, every receipt book. For a full forensic audit, as demanded in the civil suit, my mother's perfectly manicured hand began to shake. She was being legally ordered to hand over the evidence of her own crimes. The mask did not just crack, it shattered. T-0, the night of the Tri-State Regional Final, the brightest night of the year in Cedar Ridge. My source texted me a photo from the audience. The lights were, indeed, brighter than ever, desperately trying to fill the auditorium, but the seats were a patchwork of empty spaces. The local news vans were parked outside, their satellite dishes aimed not at the stage, but at the entrance, waiting to catch Lydia. The remaining sponsor logos on the program's back cover looked sad and small. The air was not electric with excitement. It was thick with the silent, suffocating tension of a courtroom. The countdown was over. The show, my mother's show, was about to begin. I flew to Chicago. I had not been back to the Midwest in over a year. I chose it because it was neutral ground. It was not my new home in Boston, and it was not their territory in Oklahoma. It was a city of cold steel, polished glass, and wind, a place that did not know our names and did not care about our history. I booked a table for 3 at the Skyline, a restaurant on the 96th floor of a downtown tower, a place so high and sterile that the city below looked like a silent, glittering circuit board. I chose it because we were above the noise. They were already at the table when I arrived, 2 small, dark figures against a panoramic window of a billion distant lights. My father, Graham, looked like he had aged 10 years since I last saw him. His face was a grayish-white, his shoulders slumped, his suit jacket rumpled. He looked like a man who had not slept, or breathed, properly in weeks. My mother, Lydia, was the exact opposite. She was a monument to defiance. She wore a sharp navy blue suit, her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection, her makeup a flawless mask of competence. She was not dressed for dinner. She was dressed for a deposition. I sat. The silence was heavy enough to feel a physical pressure in the air. A waiter glided over. "Mineral water, no ice," I said. They both had glasses of red wine in front of them, untouched. Before I could even place my napkin on my lap, Lydia reached into her expensive leather handbag. She pulled out a small, black digital voice recorder and placed it firmly on the center of the white tablecloth. "I think it is best if we record this," she said. Her voice was the smooth, practiced alto of her pageant MC days. "Just to avoid any future misrepresentations. Things have been so twisted." I smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the baring of teeth. "To avoid distortion, Lydia?" I asked, my voice just as quiet. "Or to make sure we keep a factual record of the truth?" I did not wait for her to answer. I reached into my own briefcase. "I do not mind." I pulled out my smartphone, opened the voice memo application, and placed it on the table 6 inches from hers. I was planning to do the same. 2 small, black devices, recording each other, a perfect stalemate. My father flinched, as if the second device was a blow. He stared at his hands, which were twisting his wedding ring, round and round. "Nina," he said. His voice was a low, dry rasp. He did not look at me. Before this begins, I have to say," he swallowed, a painful, audible click in his throat. "You were right to be angry. I let you, all those years, I let you fight this alone. I stayed quiet. I let you fight alone, and I am sorry for that." It was the first and only truly honest thing he had ever said to me. A confession, delivered 96 floors above the earth, 2 decades too late. "I know, Dad," I said. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of fact. "Graham, do not," Lydia hissed, her eyes flashing at him. "Do not let her do this. She is the one who attacked us. She is the one who put this poison out there." "I did not attack you." "Lydia," I said, my voice cutting through her performance. I folded my hands on the table. "I enforced a contract. That is all. And that is why we are here. I am not here tonight as your daughter. I am here as the sole administrator of the Blake Academic Fund, and I am here as the legal representative for the Jane Doe plaintiffs in the suit against tri-state pageants. I am here, on their behalf, to offer you a one-time settlement." I looked from her face to my father's. "You have 3 options." I held up one finger. "Option A, the path of transparency. You will make a full, public accounting of the Blake Fund. You will personally repay every dollar you misallocated to the Pageant Guild. My forensic accountant puts that number at $142,600 and change. You will then issue a public resignation from your role at Tri-State and a separate resignation from the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild, citing severe financial mismanagement and self-dealing. In return for this complete confession, the civil suit against Tri-State will be dropped, and I will not pursue criminal fraud and embezzlement charges against you and Dad. I held up a second finger. Option B, the court path. You do nothing. You say nothing. We go to trial. We will win. The judge will order the repayment, and the financial discovery from the subpoenas will become a permanent public record. The local and national press will have access to every single falsified receipt, every vendor invoice, every educational spray tan. The district attorney, who is already watching this, will almost certainly take an interest. You will lose your house, your reputation, and quite possibly your freedom. I held up a third finger. Option C, the moral path. You do everything in option A, the full repayment, the public resignation, but you add one more step. You hold a press conference, and you publicly apologize. Not to me. I leaned forward slightly. You apologize to Talia, and you apologize to every single contestant you bound with that unconscionable $10,000 gag clause. You apologize for the exploitation, for the threats, and for turning their dreams into your own personal ATM. Lydia stared at me. Her perfectly painted mask of composure was cracking. Her face was turning a dull, dangerous red beneath the foundation, and then she laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly bark. You, she spat, her voice losing its polish, becoming the raw, shrill sound I remembered from my childhood. You would love that, would not you? Option C, make me grovel. This entire thing, this whole sick circus, it is all just because you were jealous. She was on her feet now, leaning over the table, her voice rising. You were always jealous. You were jealous of your sister because she was beautiful, and you were just smart. You were jealous she had the spotlight. You could not stand it. And now you have found a way to ruin her, to take away her one chance, just to get back at me. This was it. The defense I had been waiting for, the one she had used her entire life. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand. I simply reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a single, double-sided, laminated document. It was a high-resolution copy of the original Blake Fund Charter Amendment from 1998. I slid it across the white tablecloth. That is not my jealousy, Lydia, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. That is your signature. She stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down. I pointed to the bottom of the page. That is your handwriting, your signature. You are the one who proposed the attend and certify clause. You are the one who wrote the penalty. I did not create the rule that day. You did. I did not break the rule. You did. I am just the one who finally enforced it. This is not about my jealousy. This is about your arrogance. You set your own trap. I let her stare at her own name. And as for the spotlight, I continued, I do not want yours. I have created my own. I explained the empty chair's scholarship. All that money you stole? The $142,000? It is going to fund it. It is going to kids from Oklahoma whose parents do not show up. Kids who sit at their own graduations, their own recitals, their own awards nights, with an empty seat beside them. Your absence, your choice, is going to become an opportunity for someone else. You did not just create a void at my graduation. Lydia, you created a legacy, and I am just giving it the correct name. Graham looked up. He was not looking at Lydia. He was looking at me. And for the first time, I saw the flicker of something I had never seen before. It was not just shame. It was understanding. The scholarship, he whispered, his voice thick. That is good. Nina, that is a good thing. He turned to Lydia, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. She is right. Lyd, we were wrong. What you did, what I let you do, it was wrong. We have to. He turned back to me. I cannot go to a press conference. I cannot do that. His eyes were pleading. But the church, I will stand up. At Riverbend, next Sunday, I will stand up in front of the congregation, and I will tell them I failed. I will tell them I was silent, and I was wrong. I will read the apology. I will do that. Do not be a fool, Graham, Lydia snapped, sitting down hard. There will be no apologies. There will be no church confessions. She looked at me, her eyes narrow and cold. The performer was gone. The cold-eyed strategist was back. This is a shakedown. Fine. I will not be humiliated in public. We can arrange a private settlement. Nina, a number, a non-disclosure agreement. We will pay back the disputed funds. But this stays out of the press. This stays in the family. It stopped being in the family when you stole from a public-facing trust. Lydia, I said. It stopped being private when you exploited 24 other families. All agreements will be public. All repayments will be on the record. There will be no more secrets. You, she started, her hand raising, pointing a trembling finger at me. And then, her phone rang. It was sitting on the table between our two recorders. A vibrating, shrieking intrusion. The screen lit up. Talia. Lydia's entire body seized. Her rage evaporated, replaced by a sudden, animal panic. She snatched the phone. Talia, not now. I am in a very important... She stopped. Even across the table, in the quiet, expensive restaurant, I could hear the sound. My sister was not crying. She was sobbing. She was wailing. It was not a pretty, composed, pageant cry. It was a raw, gasping, desperate sound of complete collapse. Mom! Talia's voice shrieked, loud enough to make the couple at the next table turn and look. I cannot do the interview. The local news is here. They are all asking about the money. They are calling me a thief. Talia, calm down. Pull yourself together. This is what they want, Lydia hissed, her eyes darting around. No, Talia screamed, a sound of pure, primal agony. I am tired. I am so tired. Mom, I do not want the crown. I do not want to go national. I am tired of being your project. I am tired of all of it. The line clicked. Talia had hung up. The restaurant was silent. My mother stared at the black, silent screen of her phone. Her face was blank. The mask was not just cracked. It was gone. The doll had broken. The project had quit. The entire justification for 20 years of lies and theft had just imploded. My father had his face buried in his hands. I stood up. I put my phone back in my briefcase. I looked at the two of them, one broken, one staring into a void. You have your options, I said. I pulled my wallet from my bag. I took out a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table, next to the untouched wine glasses and the two recorders, which were still silently listening. The meal is on me. I turned and walked away. Nina, wait, Graham whispered from behind his hands. I stopped at the edge of the table, but I did not turn around. You have 24 hours to have your lawyer contact my lawyer with your choice, option A, B, or C. If I do not hear from you by 5:00 p.m. tomorrow, I will assume you have chosen option B, and I will act accordingly. I walked out of the restaurant. The elevator doors chimed, opened, and I stepped inside. Not one of them followed me. Not one of them called my name. I left them up there, in the cold, clear air. Each of them left to face the glare of their own terrible spotlight. I flew back to Oklahoma, not to Cedar Ridge, but to Muskogee, where the regional final was being held. I did not go home. I checked into a hotel across the street from the Civic Center under a false name. I had not come as a daughter. I had come as a plaintiff's representative, as an auditor, as the new director of the Blake Fund. I was there to witness the final entry in my ledger. I bought a single ticket to the pageant. a cheap seat in the back, in the shadows of the upper balcony. From there, I had a perfect clinical view of the stage my mother had built. The show started exactly at 8 o'clock, with a burst of synthesized trumpets and a flood of pink and blue lights. The MC, a man with a plastic smile and a sequined tuxedo jacket, strode to the center stage. "Welcome," he boomed, his voice echoing in the half-empty auditorium. "Welcome to the Tri-State Regional Final, the night where dreams take flight." He began his opening monologue, thanking the people who made the show possible. "We want to give a huge, warm Tri-State thank you to our incredible sponsors." He read from a teleprompter. But even from the balcony, I could see the sweat on his forehead. The list was noticeably short. The local car dealership was gone. The hardware store was gone. The logo for the Cedar Ridge First National Bank, which had been a staple for a decade, was conspicuously absent from the digital banner behind him. The only sponsors left were the costume boutiques, the tanning salons, and the headshot photographers, the very vendors who directly profited from the system. The ecosystem was already feeding on itself. Backstage, it was a different kind of drama. I knew this because our legal team had planned it. This was not about Lydia. This was about the corporation. As the MC was reading the anemic sponsor list, a process server, the same one from the T-1 day, was standing by the backstage entrance. He was not there for Lydia. He was there for the Tri-State LLC's executive producer, who was sitting in the mobile production truck. The server waited, patiently, for the first commercial break to be called. The moment the MC said, "We'll be right back," and the lights dimmed, he walked up to the truck, knocked on the door, and served the man in the director's chair with the official, judge-signed court order, the TRO, compelling them to immediately cease and desist from enforcing the silence clause, and the full civil summons for the Jane Doe lawsuit. The corporation, not just the local guild, was now officially on the hook. That court order was the key. The TRO had been granted 48 hours ago, but the news was just now ripping through the pageant community. The $10,000 gag order was gone. The cage door was officially, legally, open. In a small, windowless conference room down the hall from the main stage, the local news crews had set up a makeshift press area. They had come expecting to film a coronation. They were now covering a collapse. The moment the news of the TRO broke online, the room descended into chaos. It was not our team that started it. It was a girl who had been disqualified 3 years prior. She walked right up to the Channel 8 news camera, her face pale but resolute. "I am one of them," she said, her voice shaking. "I am one of the girls who signed. My mother had to remortgage our house because I refused to sell pageant-sponsored lipstick, and they sent us a bill for the $10,000 termination fee." Before the reporter could even react, another girl, one who had competed just last year, pushed in beside her. "They told me I was fat, and when I quit, they threatened to sue me for damaging the brand. I have the emails. I have the texts." It was an avalanche. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, cleansing rage. The story was no longer about a podcast or a family squabble. It was about a room full of victims, finally free to speak, holding their evidence. Back in the auditorium, the parade of gowns was underway. A line of girls in glittering dresses, their smiles frozen, walked across the stage to a pulsing techno beat. Talia was the last. She was the reigning queen. She looked beautiful. She also looked, from my vantage point, like a hostage. Her eyes were wide, scanning the dark audience, her shoulders rigid. Her smile was a grimace. As she completed her turn, her eyes swept the balcony. I was in the shadows, but she found me. I do not know how. She locked eyes with me. Her face, for a split second, was not a pageant queen's. It was a terrified child's. She was looking for a life raft. She was asking me, "What do I do?" I did not smile. I did not wave. I just looked at her, and I gave a single, almost imperceptible, shake of my head. "This is not your fight." And then, I nodded. "Just once. Choose yourself." She held my gaze for another second. The girl behind her nearly bumped into her. Talia turned and continued her walk, her spine a little straighter. The show was falling apart. The timing was off. The MC was flustered, visibly reading from the wrong note cards. I could see my mother in the wings, just out of the main spotlight, her navy blue suit a dark slash against the glittering curtains. She was gripping a headset, her face a mask of incandescent rage. She was gesturing wildly to the stage manager, trying to regain control, to force the script to continue. As the MC fumbled his introduction for the next segment, her voice, sharp and furious, was suddenly broadcast over the entire auditorium's sound system. "I do not care what is happening back there," she shrieked. "Get the Q&A started, now. Do not let this kill Mom's show." A technician backstage, likely one who had just seen the news of the TRO, had accidentally left her microphone channel open. A hot mic, a wave of gasps and murmurs swept the audience. It was not just an accusation anymore. It was a confession. Mom's show, not Talia's, not the girls', hers. In Boston, Diego Rios, who was monitoring the live stream and my live texts, had the clip. Within 60 seconds, the audio was isolated, captioned, and posted to his Twitter feed. The public response was not a roar of anger. It was a collective, disgusted sigh. The comments were not, "She is a monster." They were, "She really does think it is all about her, doesn't she?" The spell was broken. The queen was just a stage mother, throwing a tantrum. And then, something happened that I had not planned. As the stage lights dimmed for another commercial, a single, harsh spotlight snapped on, illuminating a small, portable lectern set up on a riser to the side of the main stage. My father, Graham Moreno, walked into the light. He was not in a suit. He was in his work shirt, the Moreno's HVAC logo visible on the pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the piece of paper he was carrying. He looked small and broken and utterly human. "My name is Graham Moreno," he said, his voice cracking, the microphone picking up every painful breath. I am not part of the show. I am here to make a statement." He looked down at his paper. "For 20 years, I have been a silent partner. I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet because it was easier. I stayed quiet when I knew my wife, Lydia, was misusing funds from a family trust, an academic trust. I knew it, and I let her. I stayed quiet when I knew she was hurting young women with contracts she knew were wrong." He looked up, his eyes finding the dark, faceless audience. "And I stayed quiet when my family chose this show, over my own daughter's graduation from Harvard Law. My silence. I thought it was keeping the peace, but it was not. It was just poison. It was my fault. I am deeply, deeply ashamed, and I am sorry." He folded the paper, he turned, and walked out of the spotlight. He did not ask for forgiveness. He just confessed. The auditorium was utterly, profoundly silent. The MC, his face ashen, tried to restart the show. "And now it is time for our top 5, Q&A." The 5 finalists, including Talia, were herded to the front. The first 4 girls were given softball questions. What does community service mean to you? If you could have dinner with one person, who would it be? They answered with their rehearsed, hollow pageant speak. Then, it was Talia's turn. She stood in the center spotlight. The MC smiled. "Talia, your question. The world is full of so much pressure. As a title holder, how do you handle the pressure to be perfect all the time?" He was handing her a lifeline, a rehearsed answer. Talia stood there. She looked at the MC. She looked out at the dark. She took a deep breath. "That is a great question," she said, her voice shaking, but clear. "And the rehearsed answer is, I handle it with grace and a good schedule." She paused. "But the real answer is, I do not handle it. It is breaking me. This pressure, this idea of being perfect. It is not real. And I think it is hurting us. I think this entire industry, this idea that we have to be perfect, that we have to smile, that we have to sign away our voices just to get a scholarship, I think it is wrong. The MC was trying to step in to cut her off. And I do not want to do it anymore, she said, her voice suddenly strong. I do not want to be perfect. I just want to be me. And I am tired. I do not want to win. I want to quit this race. She unhooked the microphone from her ear. She placed it, gently, on the floor, and she walked off the stage, leaving the MC, the other contestants, and the entire audience in stunned silence. 5 minutes later, as the judges were huddled in a panicked circle, a man in a cheap suit walked to the center stage. He was the executive producer who had been served the papers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice flat, due to unforeseen circumstances and a need to review our contestant contractual agreements, the Tri-State Pageant organization is hereby temporarily suspending this event. We apologize for the inconvenience. The lights came up. It was over. I sat in the balcony for a long time, watching the confused audience filter out. I did not clap. I did not cheer. I just breathed. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. "I am outside, at the front entrance. If you want to talk." I looked at the text. I looked at the empty stage, the lights now harsh and white. The system had not been destroyed, but it had cracked. The foundation was split, and my work was done. I stood up, and I began the long walk down from the shadows. The morning after the pageant was not loud. There were no victory parades. There was just the quiet, administrative hum of a new machine starting up and an old one grinding to a halt. The first email in my inbox was not from my family. It was from Mr. Alistair Finch. It was a formal resolution from the Blake Academic Funds Board, drafted and ratified in an emergency overnight session. It was a dry legal document, but to me, it was poetry. It stated that, per the binding bylaws of the Trust, specifically the amendment proposed and ratified by Lydia Moreno herself in 1998, a clause designed, in her words, to compel future generations to honor the family unit, her failure to attend my certified academic milestone constituted a complete and irrevocable forfeiture of control. The resolution officially, and publicly, acknowledged the transfer of all discretionary powers to me, Nina Moreno. The irony was not lost on me. This was the final, perfect twist. My mother had built a cage, demanding that her children and grandchildren perform for her, demanding her presence be treated as a requirement for their inheritance. She was so confident that her spotlight was the only one that mattered. She never imagined a scenario where she would refuse to sit in the audience for someone else. She was the one who signed the law. I was just the one who enforced it. Justice had not come from a new rule I had written. It had come from hers. I sat at my laptop in the hotel room in Muskogee, the sun just starting to stream through the cheap curtains. I opened the Blake Funds administrative portal. My login, which had been read-only for a decade, was now Administrator. I clicked New Initiative. I typed out the official charter for the Empty Chairs Scholarship. I set the terms: full tuition and board for any student from Cedar Ridge, Oklahoma, who demonstrated academic excellence, but who could provide evidence of a significant lack of familial support. The application required 2 essays, one on their academic passion and one on what they would have said to the person who did not show up. I hit Submit. The fund, my great-grandmother's fund, was finally doing what it was intended to do. It was no longer paying for sequins. It was paying for futures. The system was cracking everywhere. That afternoon, Tri-State Pageants, LLC, facing a class action lawsuit and a public relations inferno, released a statement. They were shocked and appalled at the alleged misconduct of their regional partners. They announced they were immediately terminating their contract with the Cedar Ridge Pageant Guild and were entering into a formal negotiation with the Jane Doe plaintiffs. Their goal, they said, was to reform their contestant contracts system-wide, starting with the complete removal of all penalty clauses and a thorough review of their image rights policies. It was a corporate surrender, wrapped in the flag of public relations. 2 days later, Lydia posted a video. I did not see it until someone texted me the link. I almost did not click it. When I did, I almost did not recognize her. She was sitting in our living room in Cedar Ridge, the wall of Talia's trophies a blurry background. She was not wearing her armor. Her face was clean, scrubbed, and pale. Her hair was not sprayed. She was not performing. "My name is Lydia Moreno," she said, her voice quiet, thin, and stripped of all its practiced alto. "For many years, I told myself that what I was doing was for my daughter, that it was for the good of all the girls." She looked down at her hands. That was a lie. It was for me. I was wrong. I misused money that was not mine. I hurt people. I hurt my family. And I broke the rules of a trust that I wrote myself. She looked up, and for the first time, I saw the woman, not the pageant queen. Her eyes were red. "I do not have an excuse. I am just sorry." The video ended. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was a confession, delivered to an audience of one. I found my father outside the Civic Center, sitting on a concrete bench as the sun came up, looking just like he had at the restaurant, a man hollowed out by his own silence. I sat next to him. We did not speak for a long time. "I did it," he finally whispered. "I confessed, in front of the church, in front of everyone." "I know, Dad," I said. "I heard." "I am selling my share of the HVAC shop," he said, staring at his shoes. "I do not know what I'm going to do, but I know I have to learn how to show up." He did. Graham Moreno, a man who had spent his life disappearing, found his purpose in being present. He became the first full-time volunteer for the Empty Chairs Scholarship. He was not on the board. He did not handle the money. He was the stagehand. He drove to high schools around the state, setting up the information booths. He was the one who handed out the pamphlets, the one who looked nervous, hopeful students in the eye and said, "Yes, this is real. Yes, we can help." He was learning to be the father he never was, by being a support system for the children he never knew. Talia did not go national. She did not even finish the semester at her local college. She applied to Andrews Ridge University, a small, quiet liberal arts school in the mountains, and got in on her own merits. She enrolled in their communications program. 3 months later, she started a podcast. It was called The View from Offstage. Her first guest was the girl who had been threatened with a $10,000 fine. Her second was the girl whose photo was stolen. Her third was a sports psychologist talking about performance pressure. She was using her voice, the one that had been trained to be pretty, to be powerful. She was telling the truth. 1 year later, an invitation arrived at my office in Boston. It was not embossed, but it was heavy. It was from Harvard University. They were inviting me, as an alumna, to be one of the keynote speakers at the welcome convocation. The suggested theme: justice, silence, and the right to be seen. I stood on that stage, in the same yard, where 2 chairs had sat empty. This time, the seats were full. The audience was a sea of new, nervous, brilliant faces. "We are taught," I said, my voice clear in the September air, "to think of justice as a loud, dramatic event, a gavel, a verdict, an explosion. But sometimes," I continued, "justice is quiet. Sometimes justice is just a single, clear-eyed person in the back of the room, taking notes. Sometimes it is an old rule, forgotten by its creator, that is finally read and enforced. Sometimes justice is not about winning a war. It is about balancing a ledger." I looked out at them, at the future lawyers, judges, and leaders. "My story," the story you may have read about, is not a story about villains. It is a story about people who were given the wrong roles. It is a story about a family that was taught to love the spotlight more than the person standing in it. My work was not to destroy them. It was to take the spotlight, that hot, blinding, damaging light, and redirect it. Today, I concluded, as the director of a fund that now serves students who know what it is like to be unseen, I am announcing a second fund, a pro bono legal advisory, fully endowed, for any student or young person who is asked to sign a contract, a non-compete, or a non-disclosure, just for the chance to pursue their dream, because your voice should never be the price of entry. The first Empty Chairs Scholarship Ceremony was held in the Cedar Ridge High School auditorium, the same stage where Talia had been crowned. I flew in. I sat in the front row. The first recipient was a quiet, brilliant boy who was the valedictorian of his class, a kid who wanted to be an astrophysicist. His parents, who were in the middle of a brutal public divorce, had both refused to come, each claiming the other should. He walked onto the stage to accept the oversized check. I watched my father, Graham, who was standing backstage, his eyes wet with tears, start a slow, steady clap. The entire auditorium joined in. The front row was full. The empty chairs, finally, were filled with a purpose. I walked out of the auditorium into the warm, windy Oklahoma night. The air smelled like dust and open fields. I stood by my rental car, just breathing. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Talia. It was not words. It was a picture. It was her, in her new dorm room at Andrews Ridge, on a bookshelf behind her. Next to a stack of textbooks was her old tri-state crown. It was sitting on a book, and it was covered in a thin, visible layer of dust. The caption underneath, "Hey sis, I chose me." I looked at the photo, the dusty, irrelevant crown, the new, happy face. I typed back my reply. Me too, ever since the 2 empty chairs. I put the phone in my pocket. I did not need to wait for a reply. I looked up at the vast, Oklahoma sky. There was no applause. There were no flashing lights. There was just peace. And for me, that was the most brilliant ending of all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let me know where you are listening from and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.